The chill of a European dawn hung heavy as German tank crews scanned the horizon. From the mist emerged shapes that defied their expectations. American Shermans advancing in perfect formation. Not a single signal flag, flare, or courier in sight. To the Germans it looked unreal, almost as if the enemy was guided by one mind. Each tank moved with flawless timing, protecting one another's blind spots, covering the advance as if they were bound together by invisible threads. What German crews did not realize was that these American tanks carried a hidden weapon that changed the very nature of warfare. While German radios filled with static and cut off at crucial moments, the Shermans spoke to each other clearly across miles. Voices cut through the roar of engines and the thunder of guns as if distance and noise did not exist. This invisible advantage, communication, would prove deadlier than armor or firepower. Inside their panzer German commanders battled against failing signals. Their few G5 radios, built with technology from the 1930s, used 10-watt transmitters that barely reached a couple of kilometers in motion. Static, engine sparks, and terrain made things worse. Most German tanks carried only receivers. They could hear but never reply. Orders flowed one way, and if the command tank was destroyed, the rest were left blind and silent. The Americans had solved this weakness before the war reached its peak. On July 22, 1941, the U.S. Army standardized a new family of radios, the SCR 508, 528, and 538. Built by the Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola, they used frequency modulation. This FM technology, pioneered by Edwin Armstrong, wiped away static and made voices crisp and reliable. Engineer Henryk Magnuski and visionary Daniel Noble designed sets that could survive the pounding of combat while delivering stability unmatched by anything the Germans fielded. Each Sherman carried an SCR 508, weighing 181 pounds. Its BC 604 transmitter delivered 25 watts, more than double the German standard. Operating between 20.0 and 27.9 MHz, it had 10 crystal-controlled channels that never drifted. Dual BC 603 receivers let commanders monitor 2 channels at once, a feature German tankers could not even imagine. Every tank in a platoon could transmit not just leaders, turning the battlefield into a web of voices where information flowed freely. When American forces landed in North Africa during Operation Torch on November 8, 1942, they brought this invisible edge with them. The 2nd Armored Division rolled off the beaches with radios humming, prepared for coordinated battle. Across the desert, German forces of the Africa Corps relied on outdated systems. In a 5-tank platoon, 1 or 2 tanks had full transceivers, the rest only receivers. Destroy the leader, and the formation collapsed into chaos. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German officers observed something they had never seen before. U.S. tanks, spread across nearly 50 miles, moved as if linked by a single command. They warned each other of danger, shifted positions, and called artillery strikes with speed that stunned their opponents. German intelligence reports admitted shock at how American units, often newly arrived and inexperienced, acted with unity greater than seasoned veterans. They concluded that discipline alone could not explain it. Something else was at work, though they did not understand it. German few G5 radios simply could not compare. Their AM signals, broadcast between 27.0 and 33.3 MHz, were plagued by interference. Moving tanks struggled to reach even 1 kilometer reliably. Every spark plug and electrical discharge became noise. In contrast, FM radios ignored such interference entirely, delivering clean, sharp voices at ranges of 7 miles in motion and up to 15 when stationary. In September 1943, the Allies pushed into Italy, where mountains and valleys created radio dead zones. German units found themselves cut off in rugged terrain, signals blocked by rock and distance. Yet American Shermans continued to coordinate flawlessly. Their FM sets bent around obstacles, holding units together even when terrain seemed impossible. Reports from U.S. tankers described seamless coordination over ridges and valleys, where German sets offered nothing but silence. On June 6, 1944, as American tanks landed in Normandy, Their radios extended coordination even further. Shermans communicated not just with each other, but with naval guns offshore. German units had no equivalent. However, the hedgerow battles revealed a critical flaw. Tank radios on 20.0 27.9 MHz could not connect with infantry sets like the SCR 300, which operated on 40.0 48.0 MHz. This gap left tanks vulnerable to close-range infantry, armed with Panzerfausts. Soldiers on the ground could not warn their armored support in time. American ingenuity found a quick fix. Crews bolted field telephones into boxes on the backs of their tanks, wiring them into their intercom systems. Infantry could now grab a handset, call directly into the tank, and coordinate instantly. By July's Operation Cobra, this change had revolutionized teamwork. Tanks and infantry moved as one, reacting faster than ever. Major General Edward Brooks, commanding over 200 Shermans, used these networks to smash German defenses. Panzer Lehr Division, one of Germany's best, was overwhelmed by an enemy that seemed to respond instantly to every move. The irony was painful for Germany. They had once led the world in armored communication. Guderian's blitzkrieg relied on radios to achieve lightning speed. Yet by 1943, German production could not keep pace. Their factories managed thousands of tanks, but only a fraction of the radios required. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union fared even worse. Their T-34s rolled into combat in massive numbers, yet most carried no radios at all. Orders were passed by flags, hand signals, or pre-battle planning. Against German panzers in 1941, this was a disaster. Soviet tanks, unable to adapt mid-battle, were cut apart by more agile German forces. Later, Lend-Lease supplies improved the situation slightly, equipping some Soviet tanks with American radios. Still, even in 1945, only about a quarter of T-34s carried radios. The rest fought blind, unable to coordinate in real time. What made America stand out was not just having radios in tanks, but the scale and quality of production. Motorola's Chicago factory, once building car radios, had been transformed into a military hub. Each SCR 508 set demanded almost 2,800 carefully assembled parts. The BC 604 transmitter alone contained hundreds of resistors and capacitors, while its crystals had to remain stable despite blazing heat, freezing cold, or the bone-shaking vibrations of tank combat. By 1942, production had reached nearly 4,000 units. In 1943, it tripled to over 11,000. By 1944, the number hit 24,000 in total. More than 50,000 radios were delivered, enough to equip every single Sherman produced. Not one tank rolled off the line without a reliable set. This technological edge went beyond numbers. Crystal control meant American radios stayed locked on channels even under combat stress. German sets, by contrast, drifted constantly, requiring constant retuning. U.S. tank commanders could listen to both company and platoon frequencies at once. Orders and updates flowed instantly up and down the chain. Inside the tanks, the difference was even more striking. American crews used the BC 606 intercom system, throat microphones, and noise-canceling headsets that cut through the roar of engines and guns. Crewmen could talk naturally, passing information quickly. German crews, often without intercoms, shouted over noise, tapped shoulders, or waved hands in the cramped interiors. The difference in stress and efficiency was enormous. Power supply also revealed a gap. American radios could adapt between 12 and 24 volts automatically, their dynamotors filtering out interference. German sets, the contrast in morale was enormous. American crews knew they were never truly alone. Even when cut off, they could speak, request help, or call in artillery. German crews often fought blind, unaware of the bigger picture. Otto Carius, one of Germany's best tank commanders, later wrote bitterly about the silence inside his vehicles, describing the hopelessness of battling without reliable contact. The effect was strategic as well as tactical. General Patton's famous drive across France relied entirely on radios. His armored columns swept across hundreds of miles, changing direction at a moment's notice, always coordinated despite the chaos. German officers watching could not believe such movements were possible without visible signals. They failed to grasp that technology, not magic, made it possible. Even German high command eventually admitted the truth. Heinz Guderian, once the champion of radio in armored warfare, confessed in late 1944 that American coordination had erased the edge of German tank design. Superior armor and firepower meant little when the enemy moved like one unified force. After the war, Allied intelligence confirmed these realities. German tank radios were labeled 5 years behind in design. They lacked FM, they were too few in number, and they suffered from interference that made them unreliable. The Soviets, too, studied both systems. They dismissed German sets as outdated, and instead modeled their post-war equipment on American radios. The numbers alone revealed the gap. The U.S. produced more than 50,000 SCR-508 sets, each with stable crystals and reliable ranges. German industry, battered and overextended, built only around 6,000 Fu-G5 transceivers for more than 12,000 tanks. This meant most German vehicles fought half-deaf. American radios carried messages across 7 miles while moving. German sets struggled to reach even 1. The battlefield results left no doubt. American artillery, guided by tank radios, could strike within 3 to 5 minutes of a call. German artillery often needed 15 to 30 minutes, losing entire battles to the delay. The difference between life and death often came down to those minutes. American tanks fought as a synchronized team nearly all the time, while German tanks, even when technically superior, acted like isolated machines. This invisible edge reshaped modern warfare. The Sherman's radios were not just accessories, they were the first steps toward what would later be called network-centric war. Each tank became more than a single fighting vehicle. It became a node in a vast web of steel and fire. Together, they acted as one greater organism. By 1945, the scale of this advantage was staggering. The U.S. had built 49,000 Sherman tanks, and more than 50,000 radios to match. That meant every Sherman was connected. Germany, despite producing advanced designs like the Panther and Tiger, fielded thousands of vehicles without full radios. Many platoons relied on hand signals or visual cues, a fatal weakness in fast-moving battles. The irony was bitter. Germany had pioneered the concept. It was Heinz Guderian's insistence on radios in the 1930s that had allowed Blitzkrieg to succeed. But by the end of the war, American tanks were living his dream, while German crews fought in silence. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself admitted at surrender, "We knew how to build better tanks, but you knew how to make them work together." That statement captured the truth. A Sherman by itself was often outgunned and outarmored, but as part of a network, it became deadly. 650 caliber machine guns mounted in turrets or coaxial positions spoke with one voice when guided by radio. Artillery, infantry, and aircraft all joined the same web. The Germans never developed a countermeasure, because they never fully understood that the radios were the real weapon. The lesson carried forward into the Cold War. U.S. analysts studying captured German equipment judged their radios obsolete, plagued by static and drifting frequencies. By contrast, the SCR-508 was stable, powerful, and easy to maintain. The Soviets agreed. They copied American designs for their post-war tanks, equipping every T-54 and T-55 with reliable radios. German systems were left behind as relics of a failed doctrine. The principle carried into modern times. 1991, coalition forces in the Gulf War proved again that communication beats raw firepower. Iraqi units fielding Soviet-designed tanks with thick armor fell quickly, unable to coordinate or call support. American forces, networked across land, air, and sea, overwhelmed them in days. In 2003, the same truth repeated in Iraq, where U.S. units demonstrated that networks, not platforms, decide the outcome. For American tankers in World War II, radios meant survival. Crews knew they were never isolated. Even if they lost sight of comrades, they remained tied by invisible signals. They could call for rescue, request artillery, or warn others of ambushes. German crews, by contrast, often fought blind. Tank commanders waved flags or signaled with their hands in chaos, desperately trying to hold formations together. Otto Carius, one of Germany's most skilled tank commanders, later wrote about the crushing disadvantage of poor communication. He described the helplessness of going into battle with crews who could not hear his orders, of platoons reduced to guesswork once the lead tank was gone. His words reflected the larger truth. German tanks were powerful machines, but they were not part of a living system. The American system created speed, and speed won wars. At Aracourt, Shermans destroyed nearly 300 German vehicles in 3 weeks. At Remagen, radios allowed the seizing of a bridge that changed the campaign. In the Ruhr, radios coordinated an encirclement that trapped more than 300,000 German troops. At every step, communication proved more decisive than steel. By 1945, the balance of power was clear. American tanks, average in armor and weapons, became extraordinary because of radios. German tanks, powerful on paper, failed because they fought in silence. The story was not just about machines. It was about the invisible spectrum of sound, carrying commands, warnings, and unity. The broader lesson was brutal. Courage alone could not save a tank crew. Training and discipline were useless if orders could not be heard. Modern war belonged to those who could share information instantly. The Shermans, bound by their SCR 508 sets, proved this again and again. Across fields, mountains, and cities, the pattern repeated. German tanks isolated, American tanks united. The difference wrote itself in fire and steel. By the final months of the war, American coordination had reached unmatched levels. In March 1945, when U.S. forces crossed the Rhine, radios made the difference between hesitation and decisive action. The legacy of this advantage echoed long after the war. Cold War doctrines of NATO and the Warsaw Pact both embraced the idea that communication was as vital as weapons. The Soviets, who once fought with flag signals, now equipped every tank with radios modeled on American systems. West Germany, rebuilding its army, installed advanced radios in every Leopard tank. Training manuals admitted openly. Information dominance outweighed platform superiority, the lesson repeated in modern wars. In 1991, coalition forces armed with seamless communications crushed Iraqi units with superior armor but inferior networks. In 2003, U.S. forces once again proved that speed and coordination, not thickness of steel, decide victory. Historians would later name it network-centric warfare, but its roots were already visible in 1942, when the first Sherman rolled into battle with an SCR 508 inside. From that moment, tanks stopped being individual machines and became parts of a larger living network. Field Marshal Keitel said it best at surrender. "We knew how to build better tanks, but you knew how to make them work together." His words admitted the truth. German armor, deadly in duels, could not survive against American machines bound by radios. The Sherman, average in design, became lethal as part of a system. By the end of the war, Germany had learned too late that courage and engineering brilliance could not overcome silence. The Americans had proven that invisible waves of sound were deadlier than even the feared 88mm gun. What mattered most was the ability to speak, to hear, to act as one. Across deserts, mountains, forests, and ruined cities, the pattern never changed. German tanks fought alone. American tanks fought together. And in that difference lay the outcome of the war. The true message was clear and unforgiving. In modern combat, connection means survival. Isolation means defeat.